I'm Ruthie, 35 years old, and until last Friday, I was the senior legal contract specialist at Palmer and Associates. 14 years of loyalty ended in a 3-minute meeting where Gregory Palmer said, "Clean out your desk by noon." I smiled, replying with perfect sarcasm, "Of course, why would I deserve any recognition, right?" Little did they know I'd been quietly copying every questionable contract under my name. Tuesday was coming, and I had plans they couldn't imagine. Before I tell you how my entire career imploded in 3 minutes, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever been betrayed at work, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see what happened when Tuesday rolled around. I graduated from Stanford Law School with honors specializing in contract law. My professors always said I had a natural talent for spotting inconsistencies and loopholes in legal language. This attention to detail would serve me well throughout my career, though I never imagined it would ultimately save me from professional destruction. Fresh out of law school, I joined Palmer and Associates, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in Chicago. The firm handled contracts for some of the biggest companies in the Midwest. I was 21, bright-eyed and eager to prove myself in the competitive legal world. Gregory Palmer, the founder and managing partner, personally welcomed me during the orientation. "We only hire the best here, Ruthie," he said, with what I believed was genuine warmth. "I see great potential in you." From day one, I threw myself into the job. My typical day started at 7:30 in the morning and often ended well after 8 at night. I would meticulously review every contract, ensuring our clients' interests were protected while staying within ethical and legal boundaries. My office became my second home, complete with a spare change of clothes, toiletries, and even a small blanket for those nights when deadlines loomed. As the years passed, my responsibilities grew. I became known as the go-to person for complex contractual issues. If a client had special requirements, or if a deal was particularly intricate, it landed on my desk. I handled everything from simple non-disclosure agreements to multi-million-dollar merger contracts. My filing system was impeccable, my knowledge of precedents unmatched within the firm. My colleagues mostly respected my work ethic. There was Jane Eastwood in tax law, who often collaborated with me on large corporate clients, and Robert Cooper, who specialized in intellectual property. We formed a tight-knit team, often working late together to meet deadlines. During those early years, there was a genuine camaraderie at Palmer and Associates that made the long hours bearable, even enjoyable at times. Gregory Palmer himself became something of a mentor to me. At least that's what I believed. He would occasionally invite me to join client dinners, proudly introducing me as the brightest legal mind in contracts. He seemed to value my input, and I basked in his approval, working even harder to maintain that high regard. The sacrifices I made for Palmer and Associates were substantial. I missed my sister Amanda's 30th birthday because of a deadline. I canceled 3 vacations when unexpected client emergencies arose. I postponed dating and building a personal life because there simply wasn't time. My father once asked me, "Is it worth it, Ruthie?" And without hesitation, I answered, "Absolutely." Palmer and Associates is like family. That sense of belonging was reinforced during my 5th year when I received the Associate of the Year award. During the lavish holiday party at the Four Seasons, Gregory presented me with an engraved crystal trophy and a substantial bonus. "Ruthie exemplifies the values of Palmer and Associates," he announced to the entire firm. Her dedication and excellence set the standard for all of us. Over the next few years, I received 2 more awards and regular praise in company newsletters. I was invited to speak at legal conferences representing the firm. My salary increased steadily, though never quite in proportion to the revenue I generated for the company. Still, I didn't complain. I believed I was investing in my future with a firm where loyalty and hard work were valued above all. By my 10th year, I had my own corner office with a view of Lake Michigan. I supervised a team of 3 junior associates and had built personal relationships with many of our most valuable clients. Companies like Midwest Manufacturing, Lakefront Technologies, and Sterling Financial Services specifically requested me to handle their contracts. But somewhere around my 12th year, subtle changes began to occur at Palmer and Associates. The first thing I noticed was the holiday bonuses getting smaller, despite the firm's growing client list. The lavish summer retreats were replaced with simple day events. The personal birthday cards from Gregory stopped coming. New faces appeared in management meetings, and the atmosphere gradually shifted from collaborative to competitive. I didn't pay much attention to these warning signs. I was too busy doing my job, too certain of my position, too loyal to question the direction the firm was taking. That was my first mistake. If I'm being honest with myself, the changes at Palmer and Associates didn't happen overnight. The firm's culture had been shifting incrementally for years, but I was too immersed in my work to fully register the transformation until it was too late. It began 3 years ago when Gregory brought in Harold Bennett as the new Chief Operations Officer. Harold came from a large New York firm known for aggressive cost-cutting and streamlining operations, corporate speak for layoffs and reduced benefits. He arrived in an expensive suit with a permanent frown and a laptop full of spreadsheets detailing our profitability metrics. "We need to optimize our human resources and maximize partner profits," Harold announced during his first all-hands meeting. I remember exchanging glances with Jane across the conference table, both of us silently questioning this new vocabulary that reduced our dedication to numbers on a balance sheet. Within 6 months, the changes became impossible to ignore. Our comprehensive health insurance plan was replaced with a more efficient, high-deductible option. The matching 401k contributions were cut from 6% to 3%. The annual holiday bonus, once a generous reflection of the firm's appreciation, became a standardized $500 for everyone regardless of position or contribution. The lavish holiday parties at 5-star hotels were downsized to in-office gatherings with catered food. The summer retreat to Wisconsin, a tradition for over 20 years, was canceled entirely. "Unnecessary expenditure," Harold explained when questioned. More concerning were the personnel changes. Long-term employees began disappearing, replaced by recent graduates who commanded lower salaries. The new hires were skilled, but lacked the institutional knowledge and client relationships that had been the backbone of our practice. They were also fiercely competitive rather than collaborative, clearly having been hired under a different value system than the one that had attracted me. I started noticing I was being excluded from meetings I once would have automatically attended. Decisions about contract department procedures were made without my input. When I raised concerns about these changes to Gregory, he became evasive. "Times change, Ruthie," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We need to evolve with the market." The most alarming sign came when Benjamin Walsh, our IT director for 15 years, was suddenly gone. His desk was empty on a Monday morning with no announcement, no goodbye email, no explanation. When I asked our office manager, Patricia Allen, about it, she lowered her voice to a whisper. Harold decided Benjamin's salary wasn't justified. They let him go on Friday afternoon. 20 years of service ended with a cardboard box and a security escort. A chill ran through me that day, but I pushed it aside. Surely my position was different. I handled our most valuable clients. I had personal relationships with CEOs who specifically requested me. I had Gregory's respect built over 14 years. Jessica Wright, one of the few remaining original associates, cornered me in the break room one afternoon. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced with nervous energy as she glanced over her shoulder before speaking. "Ruthie, have you seen the new organizational chart Harold's been working on? Your position has a question mark next to it." "What does that mean?" I asked, my coffee cup suddenly feeling unsteady in my hand. "I don't know exactly," Jessica admitted, "but 3 other positions with question marks from last month's version are now empty." I tried to discuss this with Lawrence Reed, the second most senior partner who had always been friendly toward me. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, straightening papers that were already perfectly aligned. "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about, Ruthie," he said with forced cheerfulness. "Your work is exemplary as always." "Then why am I being excluded from client meetings for accounts I've managed for years?" I pressed. Lawrence's gaze flickered to his computer screen. "Harold is implementing some new efficiency protocols. Nothing personal, just business optimization." The following week, I received a calendar invitation for a special meeting with Gregory and Harold scheduled for Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning. The subject line simply read, Personnel discussion. No agenda, no explanation, no context. I spent the rest of the week in a state of growing anxiety, reviewing my recent work with obsessive detail, preparing arguments about my value to the firm, and rehearsing a speech about my 14 years of unwavering loyalty. Surely that counted for something. Surely Gregory would remember all the weekends and holidays I'd sacrificed. Surely my dedication would be recognized. I couldn't have been more wrong. That Friday morning dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect September days in Chicago, when the summer heat has retreated, but winter's bite hasn't yet arrived. I dressed with particular care in my most professional outfit, a charcoal gray suit, with a cream silk blouse and pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my law school graduation. Looking back, I realize I was armoring myself for battle without consciously acknowledging that's what was happening. I arrived at the office at 7:30 my usual time. The office was quiet, most associates not arriving until 8:30 or 9. I used the time to organize my notes and prepare my talking points for the meeting. I had compiled data showing the clients I had brought in over 14 years, the revenue I had generated, and the positive feedback from our most significant accounts. I was determined to make a strong case for my continued value to Palmer & Associates. At precisely 8:58, I gathered my portfolio and walked to Gregory's corner office. My heels clicked against the marble flooring, each step echoing in the hallway that suddenly seemed much longer than usual. I had walked this path countless times, over 14 years, sometimes with excitement, sometimes with trepidation, but never with the sense of foreboding that now accompanied me. Gregory's assistant Kimberly wasn't at her desk. Another unusual sign. The door to his office was closed, but I could hear muffled voices inside. I knocked firmly, professional to the end. "Come in," Gregory called. I entered to find both Gregory and Harold already seated at the small conference table in the corner of the office, rather than at Gregory's desk where our meetings were typically held. This formal arrangement immediately set my heart racing. Gregory was reviewing some document and didn't look up when I entered. Harold nodded, curtly gesturing to the chair across from them. "Good morning," I said, working to keep my voice steady. Ruthie Gregory finally looked up, his expression blank, professional, devoid of the warmth I had known for 14 years. There was no invitation to sit, no offer of coffee as was his usual custom. "We'll keep this brief." Those words sent ice through my veins. In all my years in corporate law, "we'll keep this brief" was never the prelude to good news. As you know, Harold took over. We've been reassessing our staffing needs and operational structure in response to changing market conditions. Gregory pushed a folder across the table toward me. "After careful evaluation, we've determined that your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The world seemed to stop. 14 years of loyalty dismissed in a single sentence. I sat frozen, the portfolio of accomplishments and client testimonials suddenly useless in my lap. "This is a purely budgetary decision," Harold continued, his voice mechanical. "Your severance package includes 4 weeks of pay and benefits continuation for 30 days. All the details are in this folder." Gregory glanced at his watch, then at the door. "We'll need you to clean out your desk by noon. Human Resources will assist you and escort you from the building. Please turn in your key card and any company property before you leave." 3 minutes. 14 years of my life dismissed in 3 minutes of corporate jargon without a single acknowledgement of my contributions or sacrifice. That's it. I finally managed to ask, my voice surprisingly calm despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. 14 years. And this is all the explanation I get. Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably. "As outlined in your employment contract, Palmer & Associates reserves the right to make personnel changes at its discretion. The severance offered exceeds our contractual obligations." I looked directly at Gregory, searching for any sign of the mentor I thought I knew. All those nights and weekends. All those family events I missed. All those clients who specifically request me. Does none of that matter? Gregory finally had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but his response was pure corporate detachment. Your contribution has been noted, Ruthie, but the firm needs to move in a different direction. We need you to clean out your desk by noon. Something inside me snapped, not in an emotional outburst, but in a cold, clarifying moment of truth. Everything I believed about loyalty, about professional family, about Gregory's mentorship was a lie. I had been naive, and that naivety had cost me 14 years. I smiled, infusing my voice with perfect sarcasm. Of course, why would I deserve any recognition, right? 14 years is nothing in the grand scheme of things. A flicker of something crossed Gregory's face, perhaps surprise at my composure, perhaps a moment of shame quickly suppressed. Harold shifted uncomfortably. Human Resources has a box for your personal items, Harold said, clearly eager to end the meeting. I stood, leaving my portfolio of achievements on the table. Won't be needing a box. I travel light. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked out of Gregory's office for the last time. The hallway was now filling with associates starting their day, unaware that after 14 years, I would no longer be among them. I kept my head high. My pace measured, my expression neutral as I returned to my office. Jessica was waiting by my door, her face confirming she already knew. Ruthie, I'm so sorry. I just heard. 14 years, I said quietly, unlocking my office door. 3-minute meeting. This is happening all over the firm, Jessica whispered, following me inside. Thomas from tax. Yesterday, Maria from corporate last week. They're clearing out anyone who remembers the old Palmer and Associates. I began methodically emptying my desk drawers. There wasn't much personal property, I realized. I had given so much of myself to this place that I'd never properly made it my own. A few framed certificates, a plant my sister had given me 3 birthdays ago, a coffee mug, and some photographs. 14 years reduced to items that fit in my purse and a small tote bag. Colleagues passed by my door, some averting their eyes in embarrassment, others pausing awkwardly to offer condolences. Robert Cooper stopped at my doorway, his face grave. This isn't right, Ruthie. You're the backbone of the contracts department. Was I, corrected him. I was the backbone. A young woman from Human Resources appeared, clipboard in hand. Miss Johnson, I'm here to assist with your exit process. As I surrendered my keycard and signed various documents, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something I couldn't yet name. It wasn't quite anger, though, that simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't quite determination, though, that was building with each passing minute. It was clarity, pure, unfiltered clarity about who I was, what I had experienced, and what would come next. Walking out of Palmer and Associates for the last time, escorted like a potential security threat, rather than a dedicated employee of 14 years, I knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of my story with the firm. Not by a long shot. Because there was something Gregory and Harold didn't know, something that would transform this humiliating exit into the biggest mistake they had ever made. Tuesday was coming, and with it their reckoning. I barely remember the drive home from Palmer and Associates that Friday. The world passed by in a blur as my mind cycled through shock, grief, and rage. 14 years of my life discarded in a 3-minute meeting with the corporate equivalent of, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." My apartment felt unnaturally quiet when I arrived. I'd spent so little time there over the years that it sometimes felt more like a storage unit for clothes than an actual home. I kicked off my heels, set down my pathetically small box of personal items from the office, and collapsed onto my sofa, still wearing my power suit, now an ironic reminder of how powerless I had actually been. For an hour I just sat there staring at the wall, my mind replaying every sacrifice I'd made for Palmer and Associates. The Christmas morning, I'd spent finalizing the Sterling Financial merger. The time I'd left my sister's wedding reception early to handle an urgent contract revision that could have waited until Monday. All the dates I'd canceled, the friends I'd neglected, the personal life I'd postponed for just one more year, while I proved my dedication to a company that had just shown me exactly how much that dedication was worth. Eventually, I moved to my home office and opened my personal laptop. With hands that were surprisingly steady, given the emotional turmoil inside me, I entered a complex password into an encrypted folder labeled Insurance. Inside was documentation I had been gathering for the past 8 months. Evidence I had discovered accidentally, but had been meticulously collecting once I realized the magnitude of what was happening at Palmer and Associates. It had started with a seemingly minor discrepancy in the Lakefront Technologies billing. I had noticed unusual charges being added to their account after contracts were signed. When I questioned the accounting department, I was told it was a standard adjustment approved by management. But something didn't sit right with me, so I began quietly investigating. What I discovered was shocking. Palmer and Associates, under Harold's new efficiency protocols, had been systematically double billing clients by adding services that were supposed to be included in the original retainer. They were also modifying contracts after they were signed, adding clauses that had never been approved by clients. The Westbrook manufacturing contract had an arbitration clause inserted after both parties had signed, effectively preventing them from seeking court remedies for any disputes. The Fairfield Investments Agreement had been altered to increase the hourly rate for special consultations without notifying the client. Dozens of contracts had similar unauthorized modifications. This wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. And as the senior contract specialist, my signature was on many of these documents. If these practices were ever discovered, I could be implicated, possibly even disbarred, despite having no knowledge of the changes. Once I realized what was happening, I began secretly creating copies of both the original contracts and the modified versions as evidence. I documented date-specific changes and who had authorized them, which in most cases was Harold with Gregory's knowledge. I recorded conversations where possible and kept detailed notes of suspicious instructions. Over 8 months, I had compiled enough evidence to launch a serious ethics investigation that could potentially bring down the entire firm. I had initially planned to confront Gregory privately with this information, believing he might not fully understand what Harold was implementing. I had convinced myself that the Gregory Palmer I had known for 14 years would be appalled by these practices and take immediate corrective action. Now I knew better. Gregory hadn't been corrupted by Harold. He had hired Harold specifically to implement these unethical practices while maintaining plausible deniability. The mentor I thought I knew had never really existed. Sitting in my apartment reviewing the extensive evidence I had gathered, I faced an ethical dilemma. What should I do with this information? Before being fired, I had hesitated to report the firm because I still felt loyalty to Gregory and didn't want to believe he was knowingly involved. I also feared professional retaliation, which had now already happened anyway. But now I had nothing to lose and everything to gain by exposing their misconduct. Not just for revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a factor, but because it was the right thing to do. Clients were being defrauded. The legal profession's ethics were being violated, and I had been set up as a potential scapegoat. I spent the rest of Friday organizing my evidence and formulating a plan. By midnight, I knew exactly what I needed to do. First, I would discreetly contact key clients whose contracts had been manipulated, particularly those with whom I had built strong relationships over the years. They deserved to know they were being defrauded. Second, I would schedule a meeting with the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee for Tuesday. This would give me the weekend to prepare my presentation and documentation. Third, I would consult with Thomas Wilson, a respected attorney specializing in legal ethics who had previously worked with Palmer and Associates before leaving to start his own practice. Thomas had been a mentor to me when I first joined the firm and had always emphasized the importance of ethical practice above all else. As I worked through the night organizing files and preparing my case, a strange calm settled over me. The shock and grief were giving way to purpose and determination. Gregory and Harold believed they had silenced me by terminating my employment. They had no idea they had actually freed me to be their worst nightmare. By Saturday morning, I had compiled a comprehensive file documenting every instance of contract manipulation I had discovered. I had organized it chronologically, showing how the practices had intensified after Harold's arrival. I had separated cases by client and by type of violation, creating a damning picture of systematic fraud. I called Thomas Wilson and briefly explained my situation, careful not to reveal too many details over the phone. He agreed to meet me for coffee later that morning. Then, I emailed the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee requesting an urgent meeting on Tuesday regarding serious ethical violations at a prominent Chicago law firm. The purposely vague wording would ensure they wouldn't alert Palmer and Associates before I had a chance to present my evidence. As the pieces of my plan fell into place, I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in years: power. Not the illusory power I thought I had at Palmer and Associates, but the real power that comes from standing up for what's right regardless of the personal cost. Tuesday was coming, and with it justice. Gregory and Harold had no idea what was about to hit them. Saturday morning found me sitting across from Thomas Wilson at a small coffee shop 3 neighborhoods away from Palmer and Associates. I had chosen the location carefully, wanting to avoid any chance encounters with former colleagues. Thomas looked much the same as when he had left the firm 5 years ago to start his own practice, except for a few more streaks of gray in his dark hair. His eyes still held the same integrity and intelligence that had made him such a valued mentor during my early years. "Ruthie," he said after listening to my account of being fired, "I wish I could say I'm surprised, but Gregory has changed significantly over the years. The firm I left is not the same firm you joined." I'm beginning to realize that, I replied, then lowered my voice. "But there's more, Thomas. Much more." I slid a USB drive across the table. "This contains copies of contracts that were modified after signing, evidence of double billing, and documentation of several ethics violations that could potentially lead to disbarment." Thomas's expression grew increasingly grave as I outlined some of the most egregious examples. When I finished, he sat in silence for several moments, fingers steepled in front of his face. "This is extremely serious, Ruthie," he finally said. "If even half of what you're suggesting is accurate, Palmer and Associates could be facing not just ethics violations but potential criminal charges." "It's all accurate," I assured him. "I've been documenting everything for 8 months. Every altered contract, every unauthorized billing, every instance where clients were misled. And you've scheduled a meeting with the Bar Association for Tuesday." I nodded. "I wanted your advice before proceeding. Am I doing the right thing?" Thomas reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "The fact that you're asking that question tells me everything I need to know about your character. Yes, Ruthie, you're doing the right thing. These clients trusted Palmer and Associates, and by extension they trusted you. They deserve to know the truth." His validation lifted an invisible weight from my shoulders. "There's one more thing," I said. "I'm concerned about potential blowback. Could they sue me for taking copies of these documents?" Thomas shook his head. "Whistleblower protections should cover you, especially since you're reporting genuine ethical violations. However, we should prepare for them to attack your credibility. They'll likely claim you're a disgruntled ex-employee seeking revenge." "Which is partially true," I admitted. "I am angry about how they treated me." "But that doesn't make your evidence any less valid," Thomas pointed out. "The contracts speak for themselves. Just be prepared for things to get ugly. Gregory won't go down without a fight." After meeting with Thomas, I spent the remainder of Saturday preparing my presentation for the Bar Association. I created a timeline of violations organized by severity and client impact. I wrote a detailed narrative explaining how I discovered the issues and my attempts to address them internally before being terminated. I rehearsed my presentation multiple times, anticipating potential questions and preparing clear, concise answers. By Saturday evening, I felt confident in my preparation, but emotionally drained. My sister Amanda called concerned when I hadn't responded to her texts all day. "Ruthie, are you okay? You never ignore your phone." I hesitated. then decided she deserved to know the truth. I was fired yesterday, Amanda. What? After 14 years. What happened? I gave her the condensed version, leaving out the ethics violations for the moment. I wasn't ready to share that part with family until after Tuesday's meeting. Those ungrateful jerks, Amanda fumed. After all the birthdays and holidays you missed for them. Remember when you worked through Dad's retirement party? I remember I said quietly, the memories stinging anew. You should sue them for wrongful termination. I smiled slightly at her protective outrage. I'm handling it, Amanda. In my own way. Well, I'm coming over. You shouldn't be alone right now. I'll bring wine and those chocolate croissants you like from Franklin's Bakery. I started to protest, but realized I actually didn't want to be alone. That would be nice. Thank you. Amanda arrived an hour later, arms loaded with comfort food and sisterly support. We spent the evening talking sometimes about the situation at Palmer and Associates, but often about other things. Life plans, I'd been postponing trips, I'd been wanting to take relationships I'd neglected. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a life defined by more than just my career. Sunday morning brought unexpected news. Jessica called while I was having coffee. Ruthie, I thought you should know. They're trying to cover their tracks, she said without preamble, her voice hushed. Harold called an emergency weekend meeting with the IT department. They're modifying the contract database. My heart raced. What exactly are they doing? I'm not sure of all the details, but I overheard Harold instructing them to restore original contract versions and erase the modification history. He also mentioned your personnel file something about documenting performance issues retroactively. This was worse than I expected. They weren't just trying to hide their misconduct, they were actively attempting to frame me as the problem. They're planning to claim you were fired for incompetence, Jessica continued. Harold specifically said they need to control the narrative in case you try to make trouble. Thank you for telling me, Jessica. Be careful, though. I don't want you to risk your position. Honestly, after seeing how they treated you, I'm updating my resume anyway. This isn't the firm I joined. After hanging up, I immediately called Thomas to relay this new information. This actually strengthens your case, he said. Their attempts to cover up evidence demonstrates consciousness of guilt. Do you have time-stamped copies of the original files? Yes, everything is backed up with digital timestamps and some documents have been notarized. Good. We should move quickly, though. I'm concerned they might try to contact clients to spin this their way before Tuesday. I spent Sunday afternoon reaching out to select clients with whom I had particularly strong relationships, people I trusted to keep our conversations confidential until Tuesday. I didn't share all the details but gave them enough information to make them question their billing statements and contract terms. Eleanor Richardson, CEO of Lakefront Technologies, was particularly disturbed. I always wondered why our legal costs jumped so dramatically last year. Gregory assured me it was due to increased complexity in the regulatory environment. I suggest reviewing your contracts carefully, Eleanor, and perhaps delay any payments until after Tuesday. I will. And Ruthie, thank you for your integrity. It's rare in this business. As Sunday evening approached, I was reviewing my final preparations when my phone rang with a number I immediately recognized. Gregory Palmer. I let it ring several times, considering whether to answer, then finally picked up without speaking. Ruthie Gregory's voice had none of the coldness from Friday's meeting. Instead, it carried a forced warmth that now sounded manipulative rather than genuine. I hope you're doing well. What do you want, Gregory? I kept my tone neutral. I've been thinking about our meeting on Friday, he said. Things ended rather abruptly, and I feel there are some loose ends we should tie up. The severance package seems quite clear. What loose ends are you referring to? He paused. I understand you might have concerns about certain operational procedures at the firm. Harold mentioned you had raised questions about our billing practices. So they were worried. Good. It's come to my attention, Gregory continued, that you may have retained copies of certain confidential documents. The firm would be willing to offer an additional severance package, quite generous actually, in exchange for your discretion and the return of any firm materials. He was offering me hush money. After 14 years of loyalty, after dismissing me in a 3-minute meeting, he was trying to buy my silence. How generous are we talking? I asked, wanting to see how far he would go. An additional 3 months' salary and extended health benefits. All we would require is your signature on a non-disclosure agreement and the return of any firm documents in your possession. I see, I said slowly. And this sudden generosity has nothing to do with the meeting I have scheduled with the State Bar Association on Tuesday. There was a long silence. I'm not aware of any such meeting, he finally said, his voice tighter. Then I guess we'll both have some surprises on Tuesday, won't we? Ruthie, think carefully about what you're doing. Gregory's voice hardened. Legal battles can be prolonged and expensive. The firm is prepared to defend its reputation vigorously. So am I, Gregory. So am I. I hung up my hands, shaking slightly, but my resolve stronger than ever. Gregory's call had confirmed everything. I wasn't just angry and seeking revenge. I was performing a necessary act of professional ethics. Palmer and Associates had violated their duties to their clients and to the legal profession itself. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring final preparations, and Tuesday would bring confrontation. But for the first time in 14 years, I was acting in complete alignment with my values, without compromise, without rationalizations. Tuesday was no longer just coming. Tuesday was almost here. Tuesday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that usually filled me with energy and optimism. Today, that natural optimism was tempered with nervous determination as I prepared for what would likely be the most consequential meeting of my professional life. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a navy blue suit that conveyed authority without appearing aggressive. I wanted the ethics committee to see me as a professional with legitimate concerns, not an angry ex-employee seeking revenge. My documentation was organized in a leather portfolio with additional copies on a USB drive and in a secure cloud account, ensuring Gregory and Harold couldn't prevent the evidence from being reviewed. Thomas had agreed to accompany me to the meeting, lending additional credibility to my claims. We met for coffee an hour before the scheduled meeting to review our strategy one final time. Remember, Thomas advised, stick to the facts. Let the evidence speak for itself. The committee members are experienced attorneys who will recognize the ethical violations without you needing to dramatize them. I nodded, taking a steadying breath. I'm nervous but ready. You should be proud, Ruthie Thomas, said, his expression serious. What you're doing takes real courage. Many would have just taken the severance and walked away. We arrived at the State Bar Association building 15 minutes early and were escorted to a conference room where 5 committee members were already seated. I recognized Elizabeth Daniels, the committee chair, from legal conferences where she had spoken passionately about maintaining the integrity of the profession. As Thomas and I arranged our materials, the door opened again. My heart jumped as Gregory Palmer entered, followed by Harold Bennett and Lawrence Reed. Gregory stopped abruptly when he saw me, momentary shock crossing his face before he composed himself. Miss Johnson, Elizabeth Daniels, began. You requested this meeting to discuss potential ethics violations at Palmer and Associates. We've invited the firm's representatives to join us in the interest of hearing all perspectives. I hadn't expected to confront them so directly, so immediately, but perhaps it was better this way. Everything would be addressed at once. Thank you, Chairwoman Daniels, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I appreciate the committee's time. Gregory leaned toward Harold, whispering something that made Harold's face darken. Lawrence avoided my gaze, entirely studying his notepad with unusual intensity. Before Miss Johnson begins, Gregory interjected smoothly. I'd like to note for the record that she was recently terminated from our firm for performance issues. We're concerned this meeting may be motivated by personal grievances rather than legitimate ethical concerns. Elizabeth Daniels nodded. Noted, Mr. Palmer. However, the committee will evaluate the evidence on its merits regardless of the circumstances bringing it to our attention. She gestured for me to proceed. For the next 45 minutes, I presented my evidence methodically and dispassionately. I showed original contracts side by side with modified versions that had been altered after client signatures. I presented billing statements showing charges for services that were supposed to be covered under retainer agreements. I outlined the timeline of when these practices began and how they had intensified over the past 2 years. As you can see, I concluded, these are not isolated incidents, but rather a pattern of systematic contract manipulation and client overcharging. As the senior contract specialist at Palmer & Associates for 14 years, I felt ethically obligated to bring these violations to the committee's attention. The room was silent when I finished. The committee members were reviewing the documentation with grave expressions. Gregory's face had become increasingly rigid as my presentation progressed. Harold was furiously writing notes, occasionally shaking his head in apparent disagreement. "Mr. Palmer, would you like to respond to these allegations?" Elizabeth Daniels asked. Gregory stood straightening his tie. "Chairwoman Daniels, committee members, I categorically deny these accusations. Miss Johnson has presented a distorted picture based on incomplete information and documents taken out of context." He proceeded to claim that any contract modifications were done with client knowledge, that billing adjustments were for additional services requested by clients, and that everything was within standard industry practice. Furthermore, Gregory continued, his voice taking on an edge of righteous indignation. "Miss Johnson removed confidential firm documents without authorization, which is itself an ethical violation we're prepared to file a complaint about." It was the defense I had expected, and I was prepared for it. As soon as Gregory finished, I requested permission to present additional evidence. "These are emails from Harold Bennett instructing staff to make contract modifications without client notification." I explained, distributing copies to the committee. "And these are testimonials from clients I contacted over the weekend, who confirmed they never authorized these changes or additional charges." Harold suddenly stood up, his face flushed. "This is absurd. She's fabricating evidence to support her claims. She's angry about being terminated and is trying to damage the firm's reputation out of spite." Elizabeth Daniels raised her hand. "Mr. Bennett, please control yourself. These are serious allegations that require careful consideration, not emotional outbursts." As the meeting progressed, the committee asked increasingly pointed questions of Gregory and Harold. Their initially confident denials began to crumble under the weight of the evidence. Lawrence Reed, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke up during a brief recess. "Chairwoman Daniels," he said quietly, "I feel compelled to acknowledge that Ms. Johnson's documentation appears to accurately represent practices that have been implemented at the firm over the past 2 years. While I wasn't directly involved in these decisions, I was aware of them and failed to raise appropriate objections." Gregory whirled on Lawrence, his face a mask of betrayal. "What are you doing?" Lawrence met his gaze steadily. "The right thing, Gregory." Finally, after 3 hours of testimony and examination of evidence, Elizabeth Daniels announced that the committee had seen sufficient cause to launch a formal investigation into Palmer & Associates practices. "Based on the documentation presented today, we are deeply concerned about potential violations of multiple ethics rules, including duty of candor to clients, prohibited business transactions, and misrepresentation," she stated. "We will be conducting a thorough investigation, including interviews with affected clients and review of all relevant documents." Gregory attempted one final defense. "This is a rush to judgment based on one disgruntled employee's claims. Palmer & Associates has served this legal community with distinction for over 25 years. Elizabeth Daniels regarded him coolly. "A distinguished history doesn't exempt any firm from ethical obligations, Mr. Palmer. The evidence presented today warrants thorough investigation regardless of the firm's reputation or Ms. Johnson's employment status." As we left the meeting, reporters from several legal publications were waiting in the lobby, apparently tipped off about the ethics committee meeting. Gregory pushed past them without comment, his face set in a rigid mask. Harold followed, equally silent. Lawrence paused briefly to answer one question. confirming only that an ethics investigation had been initiated. I declined to comment as well on Thomas's advice, but the story was already breaking. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with notifications from legal news sites. Ethics investigation launched against prestigious Chicago firm Palmer and Associates faces allegations of contract manipulation. That afternoon, I met with several clients whose contracts had been manipulated. Eleanor Richardson from Lakefront Technologies had brought her company's legal counsel who confirmed my findings after reviewing their contract archives. "We've already instructed our accounting department to halt all payments to Palmer and Associates, pending resolution of this matter," Eleanor informed me. "And we're considering legal action to recover excessive charges." By evening, the story had spread throughout Chicago's legal community. Several major clients had publicly announced they were reviewing their relationships with Palmer and Associates. The firm issued a brief statement claiming the allegations were baseless and under review, but the damage was already evident. I returned home physically exhausted but mentally energized. The day had gone better than I could have anticipated. The ethics committee had taken my evidence seriously. Lawrence's unexpected support had lent additional credibility to my claims, and clients were already taking action to protect their interests. As I changed into more comfortable clothes and poured a glass of wine, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "Ruthie, you won't believe what's happening at the office," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and satisfaction. "Gregory called an emergency all-hands meeting. They're in full damage control mode. Harold is blaming the accounting department for misunderstandings in client billing, and they've brought in a crisis management consultant." "How are people reacting?" I asked. "Mixed," Jessica admitted. "Some are worried about their jobs if clients start leaving. Others are relieved the truth is coming out. Robert Cooper actually stood up in the meeting and asked Gregory point blank if your allegations were true." Gregory nearly exploded. I smiled slightly, imagining the scene. Robert had always been one of the more principled attorneys at the firm. "The really big news," Jessica continued, "is that Lawrence Reed announced he's cooperating fully with the ethics investigation. Gregory looked like he might have a stroke. I think the firm is imploding, Ruthie." After we hung up, I sat in quiet reflection. The day's events hadn't brought me the satisfaction I had anticipated. There was no triumphant joy, no sense of vindication. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and resolve. Relief that the truth was finally being acknowledged. Sadness for the institution I had once believed in, and resolve to ensure that justice would be fully served. Tuesday had arrived, and with it the beginning of accountability. But this was just the first day of what would likely be a long process of truth and consequences for Palmer and Associates. For the first time in 14 years, however, I was looking forward to tomorrow without dread or anxiety. 3 months after that fateful Tuesday, I sat in a small but sunlit office space overlooking the Chicago River. The sign on the door read Johnson Contract Consulting, a business I had started just 6 weeks earlier. My desk was still relatively bare, adorned only with a few essential items and a small potted plant from Amanda. But it was mine. Completely and unquestionably mine. The investigation into Palmer and Associates had moved with surprising speed, largely due to the comprehensive evidence I had provided and Lawrence Reed's unexpected cooperation. The State Bar Association's Ethics Committee had issued preliminary findings that confirmed widespread violations, including contract manipulation, overbilling, and misrepresentation to clients. The consequences had been swift and significant. 4 major clients had terminated their relationships with the firm immediately after the initial findings were released. Several others had followed in the subsequent weeks. The financial impact was substantial enough that Palmer and Associates had been forced to lay off a dozen associates and close their satellite office in Milwaukee. Gregory Palmer had taken a temporary leave of absence from the firm, though legal industry insiders considered it a permanent departure. Harold Bennett had resigned 2 weeks after the investigation began, reportedly accepting a position with a firm in Boston, though that offer was mysteriously withdrawn after the Ethics Committee shared their preliminary findings with the prior Massachusetts Bar. Lawrence Reed had surprised everyone by stepping forward to lead the firm's reform efforts. He had implemented new compliance protocols, brought in external auditors to review all client billing, and personally reached out to affected clients with offers of fee adjustments and extended services at reduced rates. It was an admirable attempt to salvage what remained of the firm's reputation, though whether Palmer and Associates would ultimately survive remained uncertain. For me, the aftermath had been transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. The initial weeks after the ethics committee meeting had been challenging. Despite the validity of my claims, I faced criticism from some quarters for not reporting the violations sooner. Others questioned my motives, suggesting I was merely seeking revenge for being terminated. There were moments of doubt nights when I questioned whether I had done the right thing or merely destroyed an institution and the livelihoods it supported. Those doubts gradually faded as support emerged from unexpected sources. Former colleagues reached out with messages of gratitude and respect. Jessica had been among the first, but others followed, including Robert Cooper and several junior associates who had been uncomfortable with the firm's practices but lacked the power or evidence to challenge them. More surprising were the calls from competitors of Palmer and Associates firms that had lost clients to what they now recognized as unethical practices. 3 of them offered me positions impressed by both my legal expertise and my integrity. I declined them all, having decided that working for someone else no longer aligned with my vision for my professional future. Instead, I had taken the leap to establish my own consulting practice, focusing on contract review and compliance for small to medium businesses that couldn't afford full-time legal departments. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very skills I had developed at Palmer and Associates were now the foundation of my independent career. Thomas Wilson had been instrumental in helping me launch the business, referring several clients and providing invaluable advice on everything from office leases to service pricing. The legal community has a long memory, he had told me. Standing up for ethics the way you did creates a reputation that clients value. He had been right. My first client had been Eleanor Richardson of Lakefront Technologies, who had terminated her relationship with Palmer and Associates and brought her contract work to me. "I need someone I can trust implicitly," she had explained. "You've demonstrated that trust matters more to you than personal gain." Other clients had followed, many referred by people who had been impressed by my stand against Palmer and Associates. Within 6 weeks, I had enough work to sustain the business and was considering hiring an assistant to help manage the growing client load. The financial aspect was only part of the transformation, however. More profound was the change in my relationship with my work and myself. For the first time in 14 years, I controlled my schedule. I could attend Amanda's birthday dinner without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I could take a day off when I needed it, without justifying it to anyone. My sister had noticed the change immediately. "You look different," she had remarked during our weekly dinner. More at peace somehow. She was right. The constant anxiety that had been my companion throughout my years at Palmer and Associates had gradually dissipated. I still worked hard, often long hours, but now it was by choice rather than expectation for clients who genuinely appreciated my expertise rather than took it for granted. Perhaps most significantly, I had begun rebuilding the personal life I had neglected for so many years. I had reconnected with old friends, joined a book club that met monthly, and even started dating again, something that had seemed impossible given my previous work schedule. As I sat in my new office that day, reviewing a contract for a promising tech startup, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Lawrence Reed's number. We had spoken several times during the investigation, but not in recent weeks. "Ruthie," he began without preamble, "I thought you should know. The Ethics Committee has issued their final report. Gregory and Harold are facing possible disbarment. The firm has been placed on 2 years probation and fined substantially." I absorbed this news quietly. "And the clients who were overcharged?" "Full restitution is being made," Lawrence assured me. "I've made it my personal mission to make this right as much as possible." "I'm glad to hear that, Lawrence." There was a pause before he continued. I also wanted to thank you. What you did took remarkable courage. It would have been easier to just walk away. Maybe easier in the short term, I acknowledged, but I don't think I could have lived with myself. Well, you've changed things for the better. Not just for the clients, but for the firm too, assuming we survive this. We're rebuilding with a focus on ethics and transparency. Your stand made that possible. After we hung up, I walked to the window, looking out at the river and the city beyond. The news about Gregory and Harold brought no joy, only a sense of appropriate consequences for choices freely made. What did bring satisfaction was knowing that clients who had been wronged were receiving restitution, that the system designed to protect ethical practice in our profession had ultimately worked, however imperfectly and belatedly. The past 3 months had taught me valuable lessons about loyalty, ethics, and self-worth. True loyalty isn't blind devotion to an institution that sees you as disposable. It's commitment to principles that transcend any single organization or relationship. Ethics aren't a luxury to be set aside when inconvenient, but the foundation upon which genuine professional success must be built. And self-worth cannot be defined by a title, a corner office, or the approval of people who value profit above integrity. Being fired after 14 years of dedication had seemed like the end of my professional story. Instead, it had been merely the conclusion of a chapter that had gone on too long, making way for something more authentic and fulfilling. As I returned to my desk and the contracts awaiting my attention, I felt a deep sense of peace. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear or guaranteed, but it was mine to define according to my own values and priorities. In being fired from Palmer & Associates, I had ultimately been set free. To everyone watching this video who has ever felt undervalued or faced ethical dilemmas at work, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes standing up for what's right comes with a cost, but the alternative, compromising your integrity, costs far more in the long run. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between what was easy and what was right? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me continue sharing these real-life experiences. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes what feels like an ending is actually the beginning of something much better.